All right, let's talk Dallas Cowboys. I'm Nick, and this is our daily Cowboy show. It is game day, but there's a lot of interesting news with the Dallas Cowboys, of course, involving the Sunday afternoon's game, but the ongoing drama at one key position and potential trade opportunities, roster moves. That's kind of an undercurrent of today's action. But before we get into all the latest there, let's start off with a little stat of the day, a little palate cleanser, as we always like to do on this channel. And I created this graphic last night. I just want to pull it up on the screen here. And this is cap projections and simulations based on for the Dallas Cowboys heading into next offseason. And I'm doing this because of the ongoing Trevon Diggs situation and, of course, some rumors and speculation that the Cowboys could be looking to potentially make a deal at the trade deadline. We'll get to all of that in the details, but I just want to pull this up on the screen, just trying to formulate exactly where the Cowboys could be and explain exactly where they are. So what you have there at the bottom left is you have their 2025 projected rollover cap space for next offseason. I'm not putting 2026, I put 2025 just to make it simple. But basically after the year, when they roll over their unused cap space, which we plan they're going to unless they make a deal, they're going to go into next offseason with a little over $20 million in cap space before it's all said and done, right? This is all per overthecap.com and some rough approximation math. So this isn't like hard and fast numbers. I'm just doing this for a ballpark approximation. Assuming they franchise tag Pickens, that would be minus 27, 28 million roughly. Trading Trevon Diggs would add, if they traded Trevon Diggs this season, that would add or free up about $12.5 million in cap space. If they were to acquire Hendrickson and give him a deal worth $33 million a year, and assuming they hit that right off the rip, $33 million a year on average each of the years. I'm not saying they would. There'd be funky structures, but just to make the numbers easy, you would lose $33 million in cap space. If you release Terrence Steele, you release Malik Hooker, then you would end up with a sum total of a little bit over the cap, which would, I think they're about $4 or $5 million by my rough approximation. If they do all of these things, and that would put them right around making the cap number, right? $4 or $5 million over. That's margin of error when it comes to salary cap, right? We were talking about $300 million salary cap. That's well within 2%. So you could do an extension. My math could be a little off and be perfectly fine. So that's what the Cowboys, I think, are situated right now, where they have the cap space certainly to tag Pickens, maybe extend them if things go well and make the numbers a little easier. They can trade Trevon Diggs or cut him. Actually, if they release him in the offseason, interestingly enough, if they designate him a post-June 1st release, then they'll actually create more cap space. So trading Diggs would make sense only to get assets in return. You can see the Hendrickson deal would be a big hit, and then they would have to probably release Terrence Steele and Malik Hooker. So the Cowboys have a lot of options, right? That's for sure. But if they make a couple big splashes outside of retaining Pickens, a lot of those options go down pretty quickly. And that's where the draft picks really come in. The fact that the Cowboys have 2 extra first-round picks, and if they do trade Trevon Diggs, whatever they get in return, it would not be a king's ransom. It may only be like a third or a fourth, maybe not even that, right? Who knows? But I think they could at least build more capital and try and build out the roster. So that's where the Cowboys sit based on my projection right now in terms of salary cap situation, which is why the Diggs situation is very interesting to me, because you would think Trevon Diggs would be doing everything in his power to make sure he puts on his best foot forward, because he's going to get cut based on salary cap numbers the next offseason regardless, unless he somehow has the greatest second half in NFL history at the cornerback position. So he's basically playing for a new contract, trying to play for a new team, and he's had all this drama, had all these issues. It's been a very interesting situation with Diggs there. I think Terrence Steele is gone. I think Malik Hooker is gone. I mean, both those guys, they're not stars by any means. They're just veteran cuts at this point in their career. It's just the way the business works. The Cowboys have some young players. You look at Wanye Thomas, for example. He's playing some football at the safety position in Hooker's absence. Is he a great safety? No. But is Hooker a great safety? No. So you make the price there. And, of course, you had Nathan Thomas and Guyton, kind of anchoring the tackle position probably for the future. So Terrence Steele and Hooker are probably gone. And you can see how the Cowboys shape up, right? And this is with, by the way, Kenny Clark has a pretty big cap hit next year as well. So there's a lot of extensions the Cowboys could do and probably will do to free up even more cap space. But if you look into the offseason, basically for where the Cowboys sit today is they currently have, assuming they do all the things I said, they have the Pickens extension, franchise tag, and a splash move if they want a worst case scenario. So they've got a lot of options in front of them. It'll be very interesting how this Diggs situation continues to unfold, which leads us into our first report of the day. This is courtesy of James Slater. Jane Slater responds to a tweet from Joseph Hoyt saying, "I'll be honest, I'm not sure why the timeline is freaking out right now. There aren't a lot of details other than what we reported. Let's revisit the Trevon Diggs situation when more information becomes available." So as you can see, this was 22 hours ago from the screenshot. So we're talking at this point probably 36, 40 hours ago from when this was actually written on Twitter or X or whatever the kids call it these days. Jane Slater responds, "Can't confirm. I can't get a solid explanation from anyone, and not sure the Cowboys even have one right now. So premature to speculate without more information." Then she said, "I'll also add that I reached out to Trevon and have not heard back." All right, so we know Diggs, he's not a shy guy. He is not a quiet guy. He is the opposite, right? He is not afraid of talking to reporters, going on podcasts. Right after games, he lived on his phone, right? He was the guy that I think it was against 49ers last year. Some reporter criticized his effort on a play, and right after the game, he was on his phone. He saw the report and went out and confronted the reporter, which, I honestly don't mind Diggs for doing that. I think reporters can be a little, report the information, report the news. If you're a journalist that's trying to leave the opinion and analysis out of it, that's my take, right? You kind of want the reporters and the journalists, and you want the analysts. That's just, in my opinion, kind of separate the two. But Diggs really here has never been a guy who's been, quiet. He's not the Ron Bland who never says a word, right? He's been a very vocal guy, very communicative guy. The Cowboys certainly are not a team known for being quiet and keeping things close to the vest. So there is something here for sure. I think he wants out. I think it's no secret he wants out. I think ever since the Parsons trade, he's been frustrated. I think he's been frustrated all offseason. I think it's clear by the fact that, he didn't work out in the Cowboys facility. I think trading Micah Parsons just made him over the edge. And I think his poor play, I think part of it is sort of he's trying to, give an excuse in terms of why he's playing poorly, right? And I think he's recovering from an injury, and I think that's 100% fair, right? I mean, it takes time, no doubt about it. So I'm not saying Diggs is 100% to blame, and I don't think it's been a lack of effort on Diggs' part. I will say that, right? I'm not trying to bury Trevon Diggs here. I think he worked his butt off. He's coming off an injury, and I think he's putting in effort. He's just not playing good football. He's just not buying into the scheme. He just doesn't want to be here anymore. It seems to me a high probability that he's trying to force his way out of Dallas. Now, again, I'm not saying he concussed himself or he's lying about it, but if you look at all these factors coming together, it just seems like this was probably in the cards anyway, and maybe he had a mild concussion and just was like, listen, it's not worth, maybe hurting my career trying to power through it, for what a situation I'm trying to get out of. That's what it feels like to me. Look, and we've all seen this before, and if you've worked corporate America, if you worked any sort of job, right, you've got an employee and they're unhappy. They've, voiced their displeasure once or twice. Maybe they used to stay till 5:30 and now they're leaving at 5, now they're leaving at 4:55. They're calling in sick more, and they may actually be sick, but maybe they were a little under the weather. Maybe they just, weren't feeling great that day, but they're going to work anyway, right? And we're starting to see that vibe from Trevon Diggs, where all of those things that, used to be part of being a good employee and a good teammate, they're kind of going away, right? And you see this happen, right? You see this happen in corporate America. A guy's got his best friend at the office. He leaves the company, right? The company's going in a different direction than maybe he wants. And you can slowly see these things happen. And eventually that guy leaves, right? We've all seen that happen. This is Trevon Diggs. Trevon Diggs is gone at this point. I think it's very clear. The question is, and I think what Trevon Diggs grossly overestimates, in my opinion, is his value in the marketplace. I really think he does. I think he thinks someone will pay him top dollar, and I don't think there is anyone who will be willing to do that. That's just my opinion. He's got the injuries, he's got the issues, he's got the lack of production over the past couple of years. I mean, a lot of people may sit there and say, listen, we'll take a flyer just because he's a veteran. But there's maybe a heavy man team will sit there and say, we're a championship team, championship contender team. We'll throw him out there and see what he does. Maybe the Patriots feel like double Diggs going to New England, maybe something there. But I think he grossly overestimates his value, right? He's one of these guys that still thinks it's 2021 and 2022 with the attention, and it just isn't for Diggs. And I think the Cowboys are in a tough situation because you want to trade. If at this point you want to trade him, right? I think that's what the Cowboys are trying to do. But the question is, what are you going to give in return? I mean, if you trade Diggs for a 6th-round pick, is it even worth it at that point? I mean, just keep him on your roster and then cut him at the end of the season. It's an interesting situation, but I think it's very clear that the fact that very vocal Trevon Diggs and the Cowboys, a very vocal franchise, that there's nothing about this, no more details, no more specifics, This is very interesting here. And listen, I don't want to pry too much into Diggs' personal life, right? What happens in his own home, as it is with all of us, we should hands off 100%, right? I'm just saying the fact that there aren't any more details about what is happening and why it's happening and stuff out of Diggs himself. There's no apology. There's no like, hey, I was an idiot, right? I slipped and fell in the bathroom, right? Or whatever. Or there's nothing from the Cowboys. Stephen Jones, no comment, right? It's a very weird situation that I think I think really speaks to Diggs' soon to be ending time in Dallas. All right, let's get into this next report. Talking corner. This is courtesy of Tommy Yarish. Asked Cowboys head coach Brian Schottenheimer about Elam today and how much confidence the staff has in him. A lot of confidence. Again, Kyrie's biggest thing is trusting what he sees. There's times in man-to-man and in zone when he'll play a little bit soft. I think as a secondary unit, we need to all get better at our sticks awareness. What do I mean by that? Like 3rd and 6, you can't be 10 yards off. I mean, we're looking for that offensively, like, oh, okay, 3rd and 6, 10 yards off. And it's not as easy as where they just always look over, but we have rules built in. Starting point for us in off coverage, 6 to 7 yards. That's the rule, but it does get adjusted based on that. With Kyer, he's got incredible change of direction, and there's times where he gets a little bit deep, and he's got to be willing to step up and challenge those guys more in those tighter situations. But all the confidence in the world in the guy. The guy's an incredible talent. That's why he was a high draft pick, and that's why we made the move to go get him. So there's a lot to unpack there. So first and foremost, let me give credit to Schottenheimer and why he's got that Marty Schottenheimer and that Pete Carroll in him. Because when asked about the confidence in a player that's going to have to step up due to injury, what do coaches say? We like him. We got confidence in all of our guys, right? He's a good player. And then that's it, right? It's like a 12-word answer, and then they move on. This is like a full paragraph, right? He says, listen, a lot of confidence. Here's something he needs to work on. Here's something we need to work on as a team. But he's a great athlete. This is why we got him, right? This is a full-on just disclosure. I mean, this is a little bit of a monologue here from Schottenheimer going through why he likes Kyer Elam. And I think it speaks to why Schottenheimer is so well liked when it comes to the players, the staff, the coaches, the front office, because he's not a guy that lives in coach speak. He's a very authentic guy, and he's a guy who puts in the time and the work and the effort. And don't discount those two things from a head coach perspective. I honestly felt Jason Garrett I'm not saying he didn't work hard, but I think there were times where it just felt like he just wasn't really putting in the time to improve or know certain things. Mike McCarthy was a guy who really put in the time, but didn't seem to really care and connect. It was a weird situation with Mike McCarthy sometimes. Same thing with Jason Garrett. It just felt weird. It just felt like these head coaches. Wade Phillips was kind of aloof for sure, but Garrett and Mike McCarthy they just felt like, they felt like a little bit. I know Mike McCarthy's not really a nerd. Jason Garrett kind of is, but it kind of felt like, I've worked with a lot of engineers, and sometimes there's that little emotional disconnect. It felt like a little bit of that with Jason Garrett and Mike McCarthy, where there's like a disconnect. Like it just felt like this guy's kind of off, right? Just he's not connecting. There's no real gel there in the team, and Schottenheimer, to his credit, has it. Now, will it result in great success? I have no earthly idea, but give him credit where credit is due, right? He is authentic to himself, and he's really put in the time, and he really has done, I think, a step above and beyond with how he handles the media and how he handles his players, more than Mike McCarthy and more than Jason Garrett. But there's another point there I think a lot of people are focusing on social media about the off coverage, about sticks awareness, and understanding, hey, it's third and 7, let's not be 9 yards off the football or whatever like that, and there's a lot of people sitting there and saying, how is this not taught? Like, how is this not day one stuff, right? I mean, it's, this should be sort of super aware. And I agree 100%. I'm not going to make it, it's going to sound like I'm going to make an excuse here, but this is the reality of what happens collegiately and in the NFL too. When you have a lot of volatility, and I played college football, so I'll just speak from my experience. When you change offensive staffs, and which we did at one point in my college career, I was an offensive player. Early on in that, there was a lot of volatility. They had to do 100 level football. It was a lot of basic rules. It was a lot of simple stuff. It was a lot of not high level football, right? It was a lot of, hey, listen, double team. What about coming off on the linebacker? Don't worry about it, just double team, right? It would be the game plans were very simple, right? And then later on, as the years progressed, the newer staff, the second staff would integrate more complex stuff. And I think one of the things that happens here is because the Cowboys have their third defensive coordinator in 3 years, they've had a lot of injuries, right? Diggs missed all of camp, Bland's missed some time, Elam's first year in the program, right? They've had injuries at the safety position, right? Hooker has missed time, of course. They've had a lot of volatility, right? They had, Reddy Stewart and Bridges are new to the Cowboys at the end of training training camp, right? They've been here for only a couple months. So it's one of those things where, of course, Overshown's been hurt, right? There's been so many changes, volatility, Micah Parsons trade, new Kenny Clark, new Jadeveon Clowney. There's been so many changes and so much new volatility that the Cowboys have had to, in a lot of ways, just try and make it uber simple and uber, just do basic stuff. But the problem with that is you can't just do that and be successful. You can't just live by basic rules. You have to have that situational awareness. So it becomes a challenge for the players and the coaches, right? Because it's like, listen, you go into a situation, and let's say your rule is for a corner, okay, off coverage and whatever the play call is, you're going to be off 7-8 yards. Okay, got it. But if it's 3rd and 5, you surrender the first down. And so the DB is like, listen, I did my rule, I did my job. And the coaching staff's like, okay, that's fair, but like, let's have some situational awareness about you. So there is that challenge that comes forward when you have a new scheme and new players. This is not an excuse. The players need to be smarter. It's not an excuse for the coaches. The coaches need to do a better job explaining it. But it is what happens when you don't have consistency. It's one of the reasons why teams like the Chiefs and teams like the Rams always seem to be competitive and winning for basically the past 7-8 years, right? Even the 49ers, who have had a lot of injuries, win a lot. Why? Because they're so consistent in their program, because everyone knows, the general concepts and the strategies and the themes, and, they've been around each other so much. Even if there's new additions, there's so much, new rookies and new free agents into San Francisco or into Los Angeles. There's so much culture, there's so much history, there's so many veterans there that have played together for 3, 4, 5 years that they all kind of know, okay, this is how we do it. This is, if I'm a young corner and I go to Los Angeles and they have their coverage rules, I have what the coach tells me, but I can also look at the players who have been doing it for 3 or 4 years. I can pull up film of 3 or 4 years, right? There's a history there. With Dallas, there's none, right? Trevon Diggs hasn't played in 2 years. If you're Kyrie Elam, are you gonna pull up film of Trevon Diggs, right? Deron Bland emerged out of really nowhere. I know he played well in 2022 as a young guy, but in 2023 he kind of came out of nowhere. And then 2024, a lot of injuries, a lot of banged up, a lot of volatility there. So there's not a lot of history in this coverage group in the secondary, specifically at the cornerback position, but really in the safety room too. Right, so it is one of those things that it creates a challenge. Now, the problem with Eberflus is it's his job as the defensive coordinator and his staff to overcome that, and they have failed in that regard up to this point. And I think that's where a lot of criticism has to be given to Eberflus, where on a tactical level, he has struggled teaching and implementing his goals and plans. But this is what happens when you have a lot of volatility. This is what happens and when you unload the talent in the situation with a defense that was wholly built on being small, athletic, and getting after the quarterback with guys like Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence. Like I talked about a few days ago, this defense under Dan Quinn and the Cowboys front office, they built the greatest one-trick pony in the NFL, where there was no team better at getting after the quarterback than Dallas. It wasn't even close, and they taught their DBs to jump routes and make big plays, and they were fast, athletic, all about creating all kinds of chaos, and they were great at it. But there was a very flawed defense, and those flaws showed up against good teams. Micah Parsons leaves, some other issues jump up, and now you're only left with the flaws. And now it's on Eberflus to try and clean up the mess, all right? And it is a big mess, and we'll have to see how good of a cleanup crew guy he is. And I think right now, as a janitor, he's struggled. And I think we'll have to see how this team goes going forward. But listen, it's part of the problem of volatility. It's why consistency matters. It's why having a culture matters. Having plans and strategies in place for the long term matters. And good strategies in place, right? If it's bad strategies in place, that doesn't work either. If you need to have the right strategy in place for consistent amounts of time, that's how it works. All right, this next report is from Ian Rappaport, talking specifically about the game and some roster moves across the board. The Cowboys activated cornerback Kalen Carson from IR and elevated Malik Davis from the practice squad. Wide receiver Jonathan Wingo stays on IR for now. His date to be activated or to be done for the year is next Wednesday. So that's something to keep an eye on there. The Cowboys have said, listen, he's good to go probably next Wednesday. We probably could have pushed it this week, but it makes sense, right? You have Lamb and Turpin returning. There's no reason to introduce a third new wide receiver into the mix just to add the volatility. So there was no rush to get Mingo on the field this week, excuse me. And then you have Carson because of the dig situation. It makes more sense to have him ready. So I think all that makes sense to me. I don't know what Kalen Carson will play in terms of, just be a depth guy, maybe some special teams. It'd be interesting to see, to evaluate what kind of player he can be. I don't think he's going to be like the key star of the secondary. But, he did have a good training camp in preseason in 2024. He just had injuries and a rough start to 2025. Listen, he was a rookie, right? I mean, rookie 5th rounder. What you'd expect, fifth or fourth rounder, I forget. He was not like a first round pick. So it takes rookies time. So I want to see how Kalen Carson does. Definitely a guy to keep an eye on as the Cowboys go forward, especially as they likely move on from Trevon Diggs. I'm sure you guys saw, or if you haven't, I guess I can let you know that Washington, they're healthier on offensive line, but they're more beat up at wide receiver. They've got Deebo Samuel and Terry McLaurin are both out on their end. So both secondaries on Dallas with Trevon Diggs and Malik Hooker, of course, are a little sparse in terms of their starters, and Washington is down 2 receivers on their own. So it kind of evens out there a little bit. Obviously, Terry McLaurin is a star player, and I'm not a fan of Washington, but he's a really good player. He's done things the right way for a long time. So hopefully he gets better just so he can get back to playing football in short order. It's going to be an interesting game. It's very weird to me, but I don't think either of those injuries for Washington and really even shutting down Trevon Diggs, I don't think that really changes the game. I think it's going to be a game. Can the Cowboys contain Jane Daniels, and can they stop the Washington's really good running game? And that's going to be the challenge. And by stopping, I mean like limiting it to like not a disaster, right? I think that's going to be the issue for Dallas. Can they contain the running game, so to speak, as the cliche goes? And listen, if the pass is prolonged, it's going to be a challenge, and we'll see if they're up to it or not. All right, this next report, I kind of pulled a screenshot here from the Dallas Morning News. I think this is really important. This is talking about CeeDee Lamb and just this whole situation. There's a lot to unpack here. I'll just read through the article and give you my thoughts. Lamb said he could have played last week, but giving him an extra week of rest rehab will make the ankle stronger. He was injured on a running play in the first half of the loss to the Bears. Coach Brian Schottenheimer, who called the play, took some criticism for using Lamb in the backfield. Lamb has run plays out of the backfield in the past, and Schottenheimer said he had no regrets doing it. I'm with whatever, Lamb said, running out of the backfield. I don't know why people are acting like it's my first time being in the backfield. That was just one of those freakiest plays. I gave the guy a stiff arm, and he managed to hit my knee on my ankle. It's just football. I don't think Schottenheimer deserved any backlash. If I would have scored, I don't think he would have gotten any backlash. Things happen in this league. Things happen for a reason. That's showing how much effort a guy put in, making a tackle. And again, that's just a freakish play that just happened. Thank God it was just an ankle sprain. It could have been worse. CeeDee Lamb, we talked about it last year at the end of 2024, the toughness that he showed on a disappointing season with Dak Prescott being hurt. What a leader, right? Again, this is opportunity for him. He could have he didn't even have to trash Schottenheimer. He could have sit there and said, listen, I'd rather just be a wide receiver from now on, right? And people would have been like, ooh, a little bit of a dig there at maybe Schottenheimer. Instead, he's like, no, it's just a freaky play. Like, if I would have scored, no one would have cared. And yeah, 100% correct. So CeeDee Lamb, great leadership there. Again, he's evolved and a guy who's worth every penny, 100%. He's such a key player. I do want to highlight that first sentence there with the Cowboys giving Lamb an extra week to make sure the ankle is fully rehabbed and stronger. I think that was a really good move. I mean, I know they moved the ball well enough against Carolina to probably win the game with at least competent defense, but the reality is you don't want to rush players back. Turpin, Lamb, Booker, listen, don't rush players back at this point in the situation. You're trying to figure out so much for the season. Hey, is Pickens worth an extension, right? Is Flanoy a guy or not, right? You want to figure these things out, and if you rush players back, you don't get a chance to figure any of this out. So I commend Dallas for taking the right approach here. And one of the things I always hate is when players come back, and the Cowboys did this in the secondary, and I kind of hate it looking back on it now, is pitch count. Oh, he's coming back into the fold. We're going to give him a little bit of a pitch count. I'm like, listen, I understand if it's like an overshown situation, right, where he's coming off a severe injury, like the Diggs situation. Okay, I get that. Coming off a severe injury, you want to make sure, don't watch it a little bit. But they did it with Durant Bland too. It's like, well, we want to give him a pitch count after missing a few weeks. I'm like, listen, is the guy good to go or not? If he's good to go, play him like he's good to go. I hate the pitch count nonsense because I think it gets into a player's head. That's one of the real moves I don't like from Schottenheimer in terms of, if we think he's healthy, but we're going to only play him 80% of the plays. He would have played if he was healthy. I'm like, then he's not healthy. Then don't play him, right? That's my 2 cents on it anyway. But looks like they did a good job here with Lamb, making sure he's ready to go. Same thing with Turpin. Turpin, I said, listen, we've got a little piece on him in a second. Turpin says he's good to go. Booker, good to go. So they managed that situation, reasonably well with all the injuries there in terms of not rushing anybody back. We'll see how they do today against Washington and going forward. But it'll be good to see CeeDee Lamb back. It'll be good to see Turpin back and Booker back because it's been one of those things over the past 3 weeks where what we've seen from the Cowboys, and I know injuries happen, but boy, it's been a whole lot of, this isn't how it's supposed to look, right? When we came into the season, it was like one of the goals was Booker a good first round pick? Is Pickens worth an extension? Lamb in this offense, Turpin in this offense, right? And there's been, if you look at the Cowboys this season, the majority of their offensive snaps, they haven't had CeeDee Lamb, right? Think about that for a second. For about a third of their offensive snaps, they haven't had Turpin available. Again, same thing, about half their offensive snaps, they haven't had Booker, right? It's been one of those weird seasons, bunch of different offensive line injuries. So a lot of what we wanted to see from Dallas offensively, we only really got. And Cooper Beebe's only played, a little less than 2 games. So again, a lot of what, and injuries happen, I get that. But a lot of what we were hoping to see from the Dallas Cowboys offensively in terms of their players and personnel hasn't been there at all. Offensive line instability, wide receiver instability, running back room instability, right? There's been a lot of volatility and instability there with the injuries. So players getting healthy, I think over the course of the next, starting this week and going forward, BB returning soon. Obviously, injuries are going to keep cropping up. It's the way the NFL works. But I think just seeing what this offense could theoretically actually look like, at least what it's supposed to, will be very interesting to watch over the next month or so. All right, this next report is from Tommy Yerish talking about Turpin. The Cowboys will get all-pro kick returner and wide receiver KaVontae Turpin back on Sunday against Commanders. He feels back to 100% after missing the last 2 games with a foot injury. Again, there was some belief that maybe he could have pushed it against Carolina, but it's like, nah, it's a 2-week injury, 2-game injury, get him back into a fold. Again, he's 100% good to go, no pitch count, nothing like that. So good news there on Turpin. Again, we're starting to see at least the Cowboys look like they're supposed to look like in terms of the idea offensively. Again, there's still no Cooper Beebe. There's still no Miles Sanders, right? So it's not like they're, Mingo's not playing, for example. He's not a key part, I would say, of the offense. But they're still far from 100%. But at least they're much closer to what we theoretically thought the Cowboys could be at the start of the season, at least on paper. All right, this next comment is sort of an interesting one. I want to highlight this. So this is shifting gears a little bit to the Cleveland Browns. And I want to talk about this because I think it's interesting. So the first piece there at the bottom is according to, I guess, the Browns local radio affiliate when it comes to following Cleveland sports. Their star defensive end, Myles Garrett, on fan frustration, he says, "It's not like fans can be any more frustrated than the people who are out there putting their body on the line and not winning. You can never be frustrated than someone who's actually in that ring or on that field." And then I guess one of the radio hosts said, "You're dead ass wrong if you think if you care more than the people in this town. It's about an attitude that you're what defines the Cleveland Browns. You aren't." Little grammar issues there for both guys, but I think the context there is Garrett's like, listen, there's no one more frustrated and upset than me and the guys in this locker room. And the fans and the radio hosts are like, no, actually, we're more frustrated. We're more upset. And, I've got an interesting perspective on this because I've been on both sides of this as a player playing college football. And listen, I can tell you, losing just sucks as a player. It just destroys your soul. Because practice is hard, lifting weights is hard. I mean, you get yelled at by the coaches all day long. You go in the film room and get yelled at. You get called. You talk about how much you suck every day. You're lifting weights when your body's sore. I mean, I had seasons where I was playing with a pulled hamstring all season long. I had broken hands. Right, a lot of people were dealing with injuries. You're even if you don't have severe injuries, you're beat up, you're mashed up. You wake up every morning sore. You're exhausted all the time. It's such a slog, right? And then you have to deal with people telling you suck because you're losing, and you suck because you're losing. And so it's one of those things, as a player, it is incredibly frustrating and just to go through that process and know you're losing. And I've been on that side of it. But I will say, as a fan, yeah, I mean, it's more emotional, it's more visceral, it's more connection, right? I get more of a, like, it's such a weird way. When I used to win as a player, you felt that was a high like you'd never experienced. If you guys have ever played, major football, whether it be high school, college, or pro, winning a big game or winning a game, and boy, that is an awesome moment, right? But by the next day, you're totally basically moved on, right? You're moved on to the next opponent because you're involved in the process. You're involved in meetings and film. I mean, we'd play a game Saturday night, and we would have meetings at like 1 o'clock the next day, and then lifting weights and then film, and then we'd be on the practice field walking through stuff for the next game. So basically, if we won a game by 9 o'clock, by 1 o'clock the next day, we're talking like, what is that? Help me out with the math. 16 hours? 16 hours later, we were basically starting to move on, and by like 5 o'clock, we were 100% moved on. So 24 hours, right? Talking about the 24-hour rule, like we didn't celebrate wins for 24 hours. By 24 hours, it was completely in the rearview mirror. Now, the bad news is, you didn't celebrate wins. The good news is you didn't celebrate losses. Losses linger as fans, right? You feel a loss for years as a fan. You feel a loss for weeks, for months, right? It's just the way it works. And I think there needs to be a little bit of recognition from a fan's perspective that, listen, these are these guys and they're getting paid millions of dollars. And I understand there's that element too. But it is absolutely miserable just from a human perspective to be on a losing team. Like your life sucks, right? Because you can't escape it. If you're a fan of a losing team, right? You can turn off the TV, or you can go to work on Monday through Wednesday or Monday through Friday or whatever, and then do something else. You can watch a different sport. You can watch Netflix or whatever, right? You can find different things to do. If you're a player, it just sticks with you. It just sticks with you forever. You can't escape it because it's who you are. And there is that element there that I think fans need to understand, that losing just creeps into who you are as a player. If you're any kind of good, if you're any kind of competitor. And I think fans need to understand that too, because you can be very hard on players, and deservedly so in some instances. But understand, like, losing, it becomes part of your soul, right? I used to joke that when we've had losing streaks in college, you'd walk around and you would like, you get this feeling where like, servers don't, you feel like your service sucks because, these are a bunch of losers, right? Girls kind of look down and you're like, oh, who are these guys, right? Just whether that's real or not, that's not the perception is, right? You just feel like it's a lot harder, like life sucks. You're a loser. It just eats at you. As a fan, it's they're losers, right? The Browns are losers, the Cowboys are losers, whatever. And while it's still upsetting because you have an emotional connection as a fan, there is that sort of personal disconnect. Whereas the player and the team, they're losers. And as a player, I can tell you, I've been a loser, and it sucks because it just eats at you as a human being. Just if you're any sort of competitor, if you have any sort of pride in your work, right, it just eats at you as because it's not like corporate America where if you have if you have a bad quarter, it's not like something where it's like, well, who cares, once every 3 months, I don't even follow the stock market anyway. Every single week you have win or lose. And if you're losing all the time, you've become a loser, and it's something that destroys you from a soul perspective. And I know a lot of fans can be very critical, but I've been on the side of the players, right? I've been on both, but I've been on the side as a player, especially in the middle of a losing streak. And guys, it is one of the worst feelings you can ever imagine. I don't wish that on anyone. The highs of winning a big game, I wish everyone could experience that. But the highs of being in the middle of the lows, of being in the middle of a losing streak, guys, there's nothing worse. There is nothing worse. And I think fans need to understand that. And I think players also need to understand that the emotional connection that fans have, is very real. And I think that both sides need to sit there and take a step back and say, okay, I can see where the other side is coming from. So this is something to keep in mind. Just my 2 cents on this issue. All right, this is another weird thing. This is per Pro Football Talk. New judge in the Mark Sanchez criminal case lost cameras in the courtroom, reversing decision made by the judge previously handling the prosecution. All right, why do we care? Because it's Mark Sanchez being showed here in a Cowboys jersey, which is sort of what the heck, right? Mark Sanchez was drafted by the New York Jets, his first-round pick, started most of his career with the Jets, took them to the playoffs a few times, started multiple games for the Philadelphia Eagles, even started a game for Washington. He never started a game for Dallas, was there for one season as a backup. So why is he being shown here in a Cowboys uniform? It's because the Dallas Cowboys brand is the most powerful brand in football. If they show Mark Sanchez in an Eagles uniform, right? Remember, he started games for Philadelphia. The Eagles are Super Bowl champs. So everyone should be talking about them. Their clicks will drop 80, 90%. Guarantee it. Right? They showed him in a Jets uniform, media capital of the world, New York, right? Clicks will drop 80, 90%. They show it here in a Cowboys uniform because it draws attention. It draws energy. It draws clicks. It draws engagement. That is the power of the Cowboys brand. And I think that's why a lot of people, when they, wonder, just why the discussion always seems to revolve around the Cowboys, it's because this brand and this image, even if they're not, dynastically good like the Chiefs or like the Patriots before them, the brand is so powerful that every single person in the media, just in order for them to be successful, in order for their business to work, Pro Football Talk, NBC, ESPN, Fox Sports, they have got to pull the Cowboys into it and just at least make some sort of connection, even if there's no reason to, like we see here, just because the brand is so valuable. And without it, literally without the Cowboys brand, the NFL probably isn't the number one sport in America. I think it's a fact. The Cowboys brand pulls the NFL ahead of everybody else. There are times where baseball and basketball can, college football too, if you want to count them, kind of right there even with the NFL. If you remove Dallas, you add Dallas, it puts them over the top. And I think that's what people, when they talk about the Cowboys, sometimes forget, is that they are the reason the NFL is the dominant power in American sports because of the Dallas Cowboys, because of the brand. And this is an example of it right here. All right, let's get into some comments, starting with member comments, as I always do. Really appreciate our members. Again, if you want to become a member of this show, there's a link in the description box below. I will always go to member comments first, and I always address every single member comment. That is my promise. No guarantees on non-member comments. That's just as time permitting. But without further ado, let's get into Chris Oldham's comments here. He says, my focus this week will be the performance of the interior D-line, a.k.a. the defensive tackles, the 1 and 3 techniques. Those are the defensive positions that are getting moved, leading to opposing rushing attacks gashing us up the middle. Under the recent defensive schemes, when we get gashed, the scheme is generally D-line playing head-up gap responsibility. We don't have and haven't had for a long time the personnel to run the scheme all game long. Of the 6 players in the DT room, Kenny Clark and Solomon Thomas are the best you have for that scheme. 1 technique rotation is Clark, Jay Toya, Mozzie, and 3 technique rotation is Osa and Thomas. Winfrey's on IR with no estimated return date being reported. Toya is a 6th-round rookie. I thought he was 7th round, but fact-check me on that. 1 technique maturation thumbnail rule. Players usually show their true colors after 2.5, 3 years, and Mozzie is a no-show. Also has a bad tendency to jump around blocks, opening interior run lanes. So what happened when we played the Jets, who were a decent run team? The entire front 7 came alive. Pass rushers getting home while also limiting the rushing attack. What was different? Different scheme for the DL, especially the DTs. The DL ran slants in games, gap swaps, stunts, loops, etc. Surprise, surprise. The scheme fit the personnel. I haven't seen that scheme since. Solutions for this year: scheme change for the front 4. Obviously, run blitzes would also help when playing straight up gap. Personnel wise, trade for 1 technique on his 1st or 2nd contract. Going forward, draft 1 technique, maybe multiple. Plus, don't forget the thumb rule above. Plus, free agents, and I'm talking big boys, hogs, run stuffers. No tweeners allowed. Interesting fact: since Jerry Jones bought the Cowboys in 1989, Dallas has selected 3 DTs, 3 of 34. 1 was Mozzie Smith, and 2 were both selected in 1991. Every other DT that has played for Dallas, including the Super Bowl teams, went round 2, 7 trades or free agents. All right, so there's a lot there to unpack. I don't disagree with the criticism of Osa Odighizuwa. That's always been kind of the complaint against him in the run game. He is a home run hitter, and he's obviously more of a pass rusher. That's his bread and butter. That's what he gets paid to do. But as a run stuffer, he's always been kind of like DeMarcus Lawrence, jump around blocks, where it's like, listen, he'll make you a stuff, he'll get you a tackle for loss, but he'll also get you gashed once or twice a game, just because he's going to guess and jump around a block every once in a while. I think running games and loops and stunts like they did against the New York Jets, that's a little bit different environment because team-specific game plans, right? The Jets obviously are a bad offensive line with handling that. We've seen how the Denver Broncos handled them last week in that regard with the London game. So I think that was more of a, hey, listen, this is an opportunity. Now, I do think they should run more of it, a lot more of it. I think what they've done and trying playing straight up in a lot of instances hasn't worked out. But in the defense, right, there's been a lot of film reviews that have come out over the past week where, and if you watch the game, there were opportunities actually for, some blitz looks the Cowboys ran and some stunt loops against Carolina where the guys just missed the tackles, right? I think we saw Nealon miss one for could have been a tackle for loss. I think Donovan Wilson missed one. Wanye Thomas missed one. I mean, there were 3, and all these 3 runs here ended up going for 7+. In all 3 of those runs, there was a guy, it was schemed up to make the play at the line of scrimmage or in the backfield. So instead of 2nd and 10, 2nd and 11, it became 2nd and 2, 2nd and 3. They're like 3 or 4 instances. Now, it doesn't, flip the script completely, but it does align much more of what you're saying. Some of it is execution. Some of it is talent. Now, I do think they need to run more of it. I do think they need to be more flexible and come up with more unique stuff. And I think at times they do, but they're just afraid to stick with it consistently. Eberflus, the entire season, he's had moments and drives where he's gone real creative, and they'll just disappear for like 5 drives for like 2 quarters. Where it's like, okay, we're going to do this kind of blitz, we're going to do this kind of look, we're going to be creative with this, and then okay, for the next 3 drives, we're going to play cover 2 60%, cover 3 99%, or cover 3 39%, and man coverage once. And that's it. And it's just sort of like, yeah, you were a little multiple here early. I understand you don't want to get too cute with it, but then you just kind of mix it up and then play, just bread and butter stuff for the next 3 drives. It's kind of weird. And I understand there's a lot of changes and a lot of things he's trying to work in. And, there are things he's got to solve. And the game situations matter, right? If it's 3rd and 20, you're not going to run the same scheme if it's 3rd and 1. So things can get skewed. But I do agree with you here. They do need to be more multiple. They do need to be, willing to do different things, whether it's run blitzes, stunts, loops, things like that. You can't just line up and just get gashed like we saw against Carolina. Now, they had opportunities to make some plays, but that goes from surrendering 200 yards rushing to surrendering 180. So you go from being god-awful terrible to maybe just awful terrible. So there's definitely improvement to be made. Execution needs to be better. Players need to play better. And coaching needs to play better across the board. This next comment is from Dallas Birch 665. I almost don't even pay attention when Cowboys are linked to trades anymore. Haha, it never happens. We can hold on to hope though, right? Yeah, it is interesting. I think it's this time of year. A lot of teams are linked to a lot of different trades. One of the reasons I highlighted that is because there does seem to be some interesting conversation, not necessarily with Hendrickson, but with Cowboys discussion and the Diggs drama. There seems to be just a lot of stuff going on right now in terms of potential roster moves with Dallas, right? Every single year there's guys, everyone hears like one random social media report and like, oh, wow, a trade's about to happen. Here with Dallas, and this is why I waited a few days, was there seems to be a lot of different things happening behind the scenes. Diggs, Jones's comments, right? You look at some reporting here that they're interested in defensive ends that I talked about. So there seems to be some corroborating evidence that a move could be coming. So again, I don't think there's going to be anything massive. I would kind of doubt it. If anything, it's probably a trade away of Diggs than adding key players, but we'll wait and see. All right, this next comment here, if I can pull it up, is from InRead7718. I agree with Uncle Bubba knows everything. Parsons was great at linebacker. We saw him disrupt games playing off ball. I remember he successfully covered a wide receiver and prevented a touchdown in one situation. Yeah, I think I remember that too. That was against the Giants, I think in 2021. Didn't see that very much after that. He wanted the sack numbers, and he could only get that as a D end. In fact, there was a dispute between him and management over whether he was listed on the roster as a D end or a linebacker. I remember that as well. That's a good point. He wanted to be a D end because it would command higher compensation. It reminds me of the financial incentives that attract very bright people to finance. They go where the money is, even though they might have a more positive impact on society doing something else. That's a very good point, right? It's Micah Parsons actually played a lot of off-ball linebacker for Dallas in 2021, and then that went completely away after that. And I think it was compensation-based. I think and then part of it was Dan Quinn saying, listen, we'll just steer into the skid here, like I mentioned a second ago, and become this massive one-trick pony pass-rushing extraordinaire kind of team. And that's what they started in 2022 and carried all the way through 2024. And now we're left with the flaws and the remnants of that. But I do think you bring up a great point here where if Parsons had decided to just sort of be a hybrid and play some off ball, completely different world we live in today. So it's very interesting how one or two sort of, it's not like the biggest decision of all time, but it's a significant decision. One or two significant decisions from a player and coach perspective, Parsons, Dan Quinn. I mean, it kind of changed the trajectory of Parsons' career and the Cowboys, right? It's very, very wild how those things can happen. David Dobbins 5887 comments, I just smell us doing it again, changing coordinators again. Flus is a legit defensive coordinator, does the scheme stuff that wins those 49ers and Green Bay games, those playoff games. That's why Shotty hired him. I also seem to remember those two previous coordinators inheriting some talent. Nobody on defense knows where all the bathrooms are, including coaches. Half of them don't know where the field was at their last team. It is a good point. This is not and I brought this up because people were comparing, well, who's the worst defense? Who's going to be worse? Or what's the situation between the 2020 Cowboys and the 2025 Cowboys? But if you look at the 2024 Cowboys, they came into that season with basically the same roster as the 2023 group. Actually, a lot of people thought they were better because they actually had Kendricks at linebacker, right? I understood Gilmore was gone, but it was going to be Diggs and Bland and Jordan Lewis, right? It was supposed to be like a really, really good defense, like the same defense basically as it was in 2023, and then they just were not very good. So, and that was Zimmer inheriting talent. And I know injuries took a bite out of that apple, but they surrendered 44 against New Orleans and 28, and were lucky to only give up 28 against Baltimore before the injuries took their toll. And even at the end of the season, when they were healthier on defense, they still surrendered a lot of points. 27 to Cincinnati, 24 to Tampa, 41 to Philly, 34 to Houston, right? 34 to Philly at home, right? It was the Giants scored 20 on them, right? So it's one of and that was a terrible Giants offense last year. So it wasn't like they were like an elite defense when they got healthier either. So they were competent, but they were far from elite. And I just think that both those teams, the 2024 squad and the 2020 squad, inherited a lot of talent. This 2025 group, I mean, is the least talented defense, I think, on paper in the NFL, right? If you just look at just looking at the roster, you sit there and say you've got your starting linebackers are all cast-offs, right? Your starting defensive ends are all cast-offs or young players like Ezeraku, right? You look at your corners and Deron Bland and Trevon Diggs, are competent, but Diggs has had his issues. Bland has had injuries, and then your other corners are cast-offs or young guys, right? So it's literally a defense full of some cast-offs and young guys. And listen, I know Osodigizu is a solid player. I get that. Ezeraku's a young guy who's playing good. Leafau has his moments, and Overshown's hurt. But if you look at the overall structure of this roster defensively, it's like, Is there anyone here that you're like, oh yeah, this is a key piece? It's one of those funny things where when a team's offense is so bad and they do like a promo of like a primetime game and they'll show like a defensive end, like they'll show like when the Steelers had Kenny Pickett and he was playing terrible and they would do like a Sunday Night Football promo, it would show like TJ Watt. The Cowboys, obviously their offense is good, so they can show Dak Prescott. But if they had to show a defensive guy, who would it be? Seriously, who would it be? like who would you sit there and say right now? I know Overshown would probably be that guy if healthy. Would be like, yeah, this is a marquee guy. This is a guy. There isn't anyone. It just speaks to the talent deficiency. And I think there's a lot of criticism of Eberflus, and some of it is deserved, but the talent just isn't there, guys. The Dan Quinn Dallas Cowboys front office experiment with that pass rushing, high progressive attack. Boy, was it fun to win games 45-10. Boy, was it fun to beat teams 43-10 and get 40-0, whatever those games, 49-10. Boy, was that fun. And it certainly was. But you pay the piper eventually, and the Cowboys are doing it now. BMR collects comments. I've been saying it. I would trade Diggs for anything. Just get rid of that contract. But I don't think any teams would trade from though. I don't like the way Diggs was so outspoken about them trading Parsons. It's a business, and the players all know it. They should keep that personal stuff between themselves. Then, of course, he's playing like a 50-year-old man out there. Yeah, it's one of those things. If he was playing great, yeah, talk all you want, dude. I don't care, right? That was sort of Parsons would talk a lot, but he was like, listen, man, you're a great player. Diggs has not been good since 2022. And I'm a big Trevon Diggs guy. I said, listen, I trust Trevon Diggs. He'll figure it out eventually. I know the injury is 23 and 24 and coming back from in 2025, but it's one of those things, dude, have some self-awareness, right? You're not some kid out of Alabama now. You're not 24 years old, a kid out of Alabama, right? You've been around the block. You're getting paid tens of millions of dollars. Have some self-awareness. Listen, if you have a freak concussion, put out a public PR statement from your agent saying, I'm embarrassed that I hurt myself at home. I slipped and fell in the bathroom, whatever. And I'm sorry I let my teammates down. I'm sorry I let the fans down. That's it. That's all you have to say. It said radio silence, right? You talk about the personal stuff with Micah Parsons. This is a guy who's been playing poorly. He's been incredibly well compensated, and he's just not being a good sort of vocal guy. Like when Dak Prescott, flip that on Dak Prescott. When Dak Prescott has played poorly, right? When Dak Prescott has been struggling with the team, and there's been things that he didn't like happen with the team, publicly he's been phenomenal. CeeDee Lamb has been phenomenal, right? Trevon Diggs, the exact opposite. And it's unfortunate to see. All right, this next comment is from Donnie H3811. Reflection, I totally agree with. 3 DCs in 3 years is a disaster. I'm not defending Flus, but we need to be realistic. The player personnel is a mixed bag because of so much change. Diggs will be traded because of a different scheme, and I believe he is not on board with Flus's vision. Possibly to Cincinnati for Trey Hendrickson in a day 3 pick, only if Dallas believes they can extend Trey's contract. Demo Overshown will help with returning, in my opinion, because it will allow Flus to put their linebackers in more positive roles. With any team sport, if a piece is missing, it places other players in an uncomfortable position. Best example, if in baseball you lose a closer, it creates pressure on the whole bullpen. Great show. Thank you for the nice words. I really appreciate that. This is a really good comment. Right? I'm not throw it right back at you. Because people talk about the Overshown. What could be Overshown's effect? Well, think about it like this. So obviously the Cowboys started playing Shamar James more a few weeks ago. They basically replaced Sanborn in those situations and passing situations for Shamar James. Not all the time, but that's roughly what it was. It's Sanborn, you're going to play on some rundowns. Shamar James, you're going to play on 3rd and long situations, passing situations. We think you're a faster guy, better in coverage, and we want to see what you can do, right? Because Sanborn, to be totally honest, has been a liability in those situations most of the season. So Shamar James comes, he's done a decent job tackling and those passing situations, but his run defense has been lacking. Now, why is that? Well, Sanborn, again, supposedly their first down run defense linebacker. He's not great at it, mind you, but again, that's what his role was supposed to be. He gets concussion. So now Shamar James, who was supposed to just help as a coverage linebacker, now has to play every down in terms of run defense. And he's feisty, he plays hard, but he's just not there yet as a run defender. So that kind of alludes to your point where, and this is not even counting the Overshown injury, just the injury to Sanborn has put Shamar James, a rookie 5th rounder, in a tough spot, right? And this is where you have Kenneth Murray, because the injury of Sanborn now has to be the Mike linebacker to cover up all the weaknesses and the flaws and the misreads, and he's got his own severe issues, right? So it creates kind of a cascading effect, especially when you don't have a lot of talent, especially when you don't have depth. And this is what it comes to when people talk about the Parsons trade. So listen, the Cowboys since 2021 were a team of A players and then C players, right? They didn't have a lot of B players. And the reality is if their A players were on, they could beat you by 1,000,000. But against good teams with a lot of other A players, then it got moved down, okay, B players on B players. And like we saw in 2023 in the playoffs and a lot of big games and really in big moments in 2022 and 2021,
The other team's B players were a lot better than the Cowboys' next tier players, who were all C players, right? And now we're seeing nothing but C and D players on this Cowboys defense. And as the injuries cascade, and because they're so bereft of talent, it just becomes a domino effect. And I think that's something really important to understand, is that because they lack talent and depth across the board, one little injury, just to Sanborn, who's, again, not playing great by any means, it makes things even worse, right? And that's sort of where the Cowboys are defensively. Now, listen, I'm not saying Sanborn returning today, which it looks like he will against Washington, will solve all the problems, but I do think it speaks to when you have a lack of talent to begin with, and then you have injuries with that lack of talent, things just get worse and worse from there. And that's where Overshown, being a talented guy coming in, could just allow them, like you said, this is a great point, Donnie, I think this is a great comment, can allow them to use, okay, let's use Shamar James in situations where he's good. Let's use Sanborn in situations where he's good. Murray in situations where he's good. Leafau, right? It makes it a little bit easier. And that's the impact that a guy like him can have for sure. All right, got 3 more comments here, kind of running along here, trying to get through these quickly. JWS8482 comments, the Tampa 2 is an old, outdated Monty Kiffin defense. Only works if you have a Warren Sapp, Brooks, Lynch, think about John Lynch, Barber, Rondé Barber, etc. Now, most teams still run a lot of cover 2. I mean, I agree it's not in the same heyday as it was in the early 2000s with what the Bucs were doing with it, but it's still a key part of any defense. You got to be able to run it and execute it, certainly if you're trying to stop the deep passing game. Kenneth Leberke, 8216, comments, DC drafts for their scheme, the next DC drafts for their scheme, etc. Big and powerful versus light and speedy, man coverage versus zone, 3-4 versus 4-3. We are stuck in the middle of scheme and talent problems. If we do get a new DC, it'll have to be before the end of the season and definitely before the draft. Fire Eberflus now or suck it up. Bring up a great point. I mean, people talk about matching the scheme to the talent, but it doesn't necessarily work that way, because certain players are, if you have a certain scheme as a defensive coordinator, that's what you know, right? So it's not like Eberflus, for example, is like a master of like man coverage with 0 blitzes, like Wink Martindale, for example, former defensive coordinator for the Giants, now Michigan, or the Ryans, right? Very creative blitzers, very aggressively. Eberflus is probably not a good teacher of that either. We don't know if he switched it up completely to match that aggressive personnel like Zimmer did, for example, if that'll be any better, because him and his staff, they're not good at teaching that potentially. So that's kind of the conundrum they are. They've got a personnel group that matches a certain style, and they've got a defensive coordinator that has, and his staff that match a certain style. But even if they try to change up their scheme to match the personnel, they may not be good at creating those schemes, right? That's something people got to consider. And I'm not, that's why I think you got to mix in parts of it, right? You got to be more multiple. That's what I've been saying. I think a lot of people have been saying that. But just to go whole hog, they got to get rid of that and go back to man aggressive stuff. How do you know that Eberflus and this staff isn't the world's worst man coverage, aggressive defense, in terms of schemes and strategies, right? They could be. You just don't know. Again, it's the old frying pan into the fire thing. And finally, Jamie Cardona, 92, then why give Bland the contract that makes him part of the plan for at least a couple of years? And so far, that doesn't seem to fit the Flus vision. I think Deron Bland's played okay. I mean, he's had a couple not so great plays in general, right? But he's had injuries, he's had to overcome. I think he's tackled well. A lot of zone defense is tackling. I think he's done a good job tackling. And again, he's a guy I think he's been willing to do whatever, line up all over the place. So I think Deron Bland's played fine. He's been a good team guy, good leader. And again, even though he may not be the perfect corner for the scheme, he's a lot less man reliant than Diggs. I think Bland is a much more I'll say this, more stereotypical corner in terms of zone, man. He's not really tied to one way or the other. Diggs, with his size and length and playing style, he's a guy that lives and dies by man coverage, right? And he doesn't like to tackle either, which means he lives and dies by man coverage. So I think that's one of the reasons why they like Bland, because he can do a lot of different things. He can line up all over the field. He's a really valuable tool. And I do think while he may be more dispossessed to be a man corner, I think he could become a good zone corner, and we've seen flashes of it with the way he's tackling. So I think they gave Bland the extension because of his versatility. He's a team guy. He's got a lot of great tools, really good athlete, and the fact that he has a great potential to be a good zone corner. All right, guys, long show today. Gosh, I keep running longer and longer. I hope this is it's not well over 50 minutes. Geez. So maybe I'll have to shorten it up going forward. I don't know. Let me know if it's too long or not. I know a lot of you guys like, maybe a little shorter. Some of you guys like the 45-minute length. But again, there's just a lot to talk about. Very interesting stuff with the Diggs situation and just a lot of other trade rumors. And listen, we'll see how they play today. Obviously, with this defense, There's I'll just leave it there with this defense, huh? But guess what? We get to see CeeDee Lamb, we get to see Turpin back into the fold. Really interesting to see how they do. I'll be on X, with some commentary during the game, so give me a follow if you want to follow along. But until tomorrow or until later today, if you follow me on X, I'm Nick, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection.